Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in the poetry discussion playlist here on the channel. The poem in question today is one that I think will not immediately be recognizable as having implications for our world, but I think that it is a very strong reminder that the things ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, right? And you can look at this um, with the individual and society. You can look at this with today and human history. You can look at how everything that happens on a micro scale happens indeed on the macro scale, and why this is interesting today is something that we will conclude this discussion with, but I want to set the table a little bit for that discussion. There is no shortage of complaining in the world, right? I've even done a lot of complaining myself. I've even done a lot of complaining myself on this channel about literature and society writ large and culture. Now, I think that one of the things that is very dangerous to do is to look at a current situation, and this is something that you hear oftentimes in investing circles. Anytime you start hearing people say, well, this time is different, to sell all of your stocks. So I don't mean to make a literary discussion about the stock market, but that is something that in one domain of study, investing, they know very, very well. So I want to just float that out there, float that idea out there, and let you sort of chew on that while we read through London 1802 by William Wordsworth. London 1802 by William Wordsworth is a plea insofar as we are willing to read this poem in a non-ironic way, which there's certainly an ironic reading to be had here, though. Look, what I'm going to do here on two levels is something that I don't normally do. I don't normally prescribe what a poem is to be used for, and I don't normally really care why a writer wrote something. I care about what is called new criticism, which is what we can really dig out of a work of literature, not what went into the work of literature. But I think that on this occasion, it is particularly compelling to accept and adopt the reasons a poem may have been written, insofar as we are willing to read it in a non ironic fashion. London, 1802, reads as such: Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. England hath need of thee. She is a fin of stagnant waters. Altar, sword, and pen, fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower, have forfeited their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise up, return to us again, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Thou hadst a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So didst thou travel on life's common way in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties of herself did lay. Essentially, what we are reading here, again, insofar as we are willing to give it the least ironic interpretation that we can, is a poet hearkening back to one of the poets of yore, John Milton, being called upon by William Wordsworth because John Milton had the gusto to keep things righteous, the gusto to keep things well within the purview of what might be considered good. Now, I have often said that I would rather be an agent of change than a force for good, and we're going to see why that is while we talk about this poem. This is, once again, William Wordsworth shouting into the void, hoping that John Milton will return with that goodness of altar, sword, and pen, claiming that England at this time is stagnant in regard to those things. And stagnant, I think, has a little bit of a different connotation here when we are talking about this poem, because it's not stagnant in general, it's stagnant water. Stagnant water, water that is not moving, water that is still water, is bad for you. You don't want to drink still water, right? So waters that are stagnant have a different connotation than what we would generally consider a stagnant culture. If that culture, which is stagnant, is being compared to stagnant water, it means that the culture is poisonous. It is degrading. I dropped my pen. The poem is saying that the world that Milton helped create with his words is much better, in short, than the world in which William Wordsworth was writing, and, indeed, the world that William Wordsworth was able to prognosticate becoming. So, let's talk about this. John Milton, the poet to whom the 1800s writer here, William Wordsworth, is hearkening, was born December 9th, 1608, and died November 8th, 1674. Now, I know I get guff when I consult ChatGPT, so chastise me if you must, but I wanted just a brief summary of an event that happened in England in 1600s, right? We're hearkening back to this morally virtuous world in which John Milton had found himself and indeed helped create in a sort of way. That event, the morally upstanding event, right? We're hearkening back to a world of nostalgia, right? The world that helped create the world that from which Wordsworth is writing, these shoulders of giants on whom Wordsworth is standing to look out and make this poem. We'll go back just to 1619. Now, at this time, John Milton was just 11 years old, but here is an event from that world. The witches of Belvoir were a group of individuals accused of witchcraft in 1619 in the village of Belvoir, which is located in what is now Leicestershire, England. The trial of the Belvoir witches, is one of the most well-known witchcraft trials in history. The accusations began when the wife of the local landowner, the Earl of Rutland, fell ill. She experienced fits and strange symptoms, which were believed by some to be a result of witchcraft. Suspicion fell on Joan Flower, a local woman who worked as a servant in the household of the Earl of Rutland. Why? Well, I mean, witches bewitching, bro. Right? We can all spot a witch when we see one, especially in a morally virtuous society. We can just spot the witches. Under interrogation now, this is a very ambiguous word. Joan Flower confessed to witchcraft, which implicated her two daughters, Margaret and Philippa, as well as her sister-in-law, Joan Wilmot. The women were accused of causing the illness through witchcraft and of conspiring to murder the Earl of Rutland. The trial of the Belvoir witches, took place at Lincoln Assizes in 1619. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, because witches, they get to evaporate the concrete evidence, all four women were found guilty of witchcraft and sentenced to death. They were executed by hanging. The trial of the Belvoir witches is notable for several reasons. It occurred during a period of heightened fear and suspicion of witchcraft in England, which, when a society is of the utmost of virtue, we can all spot the witches through fear and suspicion. And it reflected the widespread belief in the reality of witchcraft and the need to eradicate it. Eradicate witchcraft. That doesn't sound paranoid, right? It's just because everyone was so morally virtuous. Additionally, the case highlighted the vulnerability of women, particularly those from marginalized or lower social classes, to accusations of witchcraft. Where else are witches going to hang out? The trial of the Belvoir witches remains a significant episode in English history and continues to be studied by historians and scholars interested in the history of witchcraft and witch trials. Now, far be it from me to claim to intimately know the England of William Wordsworth. Far be it from me to claim to understand William Wordsworth, the individual, himself. I don't think that Wordsworth was an evil person, right? I happen to enjoy the poetry of Wordsworth quite a bit. I'm not even claiming that Wordsworth is wrong in what he is claiming to be moral stagnation or stagnation of the altar, sword, and pen. Probably, not only on some occasions, in some accounts, is William Wordsworth absolutely correct, but probably he means it too. This is his personal truth. All ages, just all societies, all cultures, all times in place, just like all individuals, have their problems. It is, in my opinion, very dangerous to look at the things around you and say, this time is different. To look around you and feel, believe, claim, indeed act towards the not just assumption, not just the conclusion, not just the experience, but also the activation of those things which the individual believes are failing. What is the best way to do this? What is the best way to look around you and say, ooh, I think everything's going to pot and things need to change? Change the self. Change the individual. Change your world one day at a time, one moment at a time, one morsel of existence at a time. What are you doing right now that adds to the flowing waters of altar, sword, and pen? This is something that is very prevalent today. There is a bit of hysteria, and I'm not claiming on the necessarily socially conservative side. I'm not claiming necessarily on the socially liberal side. I think that everyone is a little bit wrong in their own way. I think that everyone's a little bit wrong in their own way. I think that one of the things which is troubling in today's world is how quick we are all to blame, how quick all of us are to point. There's the old phrase, be the change that you wish to see in the world. This does not mean point to other people and try to eradicate them in their standing. It means try to be the morally virtuous and upstanding individual that you think is best. Practice what you want to see. Now, I do not mean this video in a preachy manner, though I know that it's almost impossible to talk about these things without being preachy in some way, shape, form, fashion, facet, or manner. And that's unfortunate. In my opinion, one of the things which will help the world, and this is going to sound very grandiose, this is going to sound very egotistical, one of the things, in my opinion, which adds to the fabric of culture is poetry. That's what brought me here to make this video. That's what brought you here to watch this video. You're not watching this video for me. You're watching this video for poetry. You're watching this video for literature. You're watching this video because of the words on screen, not my pretty face, not my stunning, honey-like voice, not the masculine paradigm that appears before you. No, you're here for the literature, and I hope that's true. I hope that you spread literature in your own way. I think that is what would contribute to the flowing waters of altar, sword, and pen. And I hope that that's what I'm doing here, even if in my own little ways I perpetuate this same sort of hearkening back when I speak about, in particular, Emily Dickinson, right? I think that what the world needs now is love, sweet love. What the world needs now is poetry, sweet poetry. That's why I think that it is dangerous, and I do mean dangerous. I don't use that word haphazardly the way that it's thrown around in sort of the ambiance of the internet age. I do not mean that word in the way that it is sort of haphazardly thrown about in, and it pains me to have to use this term as a term of condescension because I do not think that it is particularly negative in its own right, but in this postmodern sort of swing of the cultural pendulum, not everything is an actual danger. But a lot of finger pointing is always dangerous. A lot of finger pointing always leads us right back to this sort of stuff. Always leads us right back to heightened fear and suspicion. Always leads us back to the want to eradicate. That is not good. That's all I have for this poetry discussion. I hope that this has brought a smile to your face. I hope that, that was an ironic use of that phrase, bringing a smile to your face. But I do hope that when we are able to look back at a poem like London 1802 and say, yeah, we're doing the same thing today, we can also see that in London 1619, they would have been doing the same thing about London 1400, during which probably there were more witch burnings. And we are doing the same thing today, a little bit in error, just like we always have. If you like or appreciate what I do here on the channel, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next poetry discussion.